Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you all so much for being here at the Elliot Book Company. My name is Megan. I am a bookseller and an events host here, and tonight I am thrilled to welcome Mark Frost and Harley Peyton here to discuss Mark Frost's brand new book released today, The Yankee Sphinx. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests. Mark Frost is an American novelist, screenwriter, director, and film producer, best known as a writer for the television series Hill Street Blues and as the co-creator of the television series Twin Peaks. Harley Peyton is a writer-producer with a long and varied career in movies and television. Peyton's first screen credit was an adaptation of the novel Less Than Zero, followed by a number of other movie projects, including Heaven's Prisoners, Keys to Tulsa, Bandits, and Friends with Benefits. Peyton's first television experience was as a writer-producer on the iconic series Twin Peaks. He received an Emmy nomination and a Golden Globe for his contributions. The Yankee Sphinx, inspired by Will Hassett's Real Diaries, focuses on the last few years of FDR's life. From Will's empathetic perspective, we witness FDR managing the Allied military campaign abroad and parrying shots from isolationist politicians at home, all while reckoning with his rapidly declining health. Elegantly written, bursting with personality, and perfectly capturing life in wartime Washington, The Yankee Sphinx is a marvelous work by one of our most versatile writers. Please join me in welcoming Mark Frost and Harley Peyton.
I could have just moved this, couldn't I? How is everybody?
Good.
Very nice to see you. Thank you for coming out. I know it's hard to leave our homes at times these days. And it is Cinco de Mayo, so you could probably be having more fun somewhere else, but we really appreciate you coming out to join us. I'm going to read a little bit from the book before we talk about it. I think Megan gave you a pretty good precis of what the book is about. So let's dive right in, shall we? We're about 15 pages into the book. This might be a giveaway about what the chapter's about. Sunday, December 7th, 1941. Ring a bell? Have a look at this bishop, said FDR. Just came over from state. Bishop was the nickname the boss gave me not long after I joined the staff. He bestowed one on each of us in his inner circle, a way to soften the creeping formality of high office. 1:30 that chilly afternoon, I'd been called to the president's study on the second floor. Remains of lunch sat on a couple of trays. The boss wore a dark turtleneck and sounded like he was fighting a cold. The weekly packet of new stamps for his collection from Treasury lay open on his desk. He bit into an apple and turned to the south window, gazing out at the ellipse in the Washington Monument, while I picked up and scanned a typed document from the State Department bearing a classified stamp. That's page 14, said Harry Hopkins. We intercepted the first 13 they sent last night, transmitted in code from Tokyo to their embassy. Harry reclined on the sofa, his arms crossed behind his head. The boss's closest advisor, Harry the Hop, lived down the hall and looked like he hadn't slept for days, even more skeletal and pale than usual in a baggy sweater and slacks. They held back that last one deliberately, Harry said, his pale eyes burning, for over 12 hours. Why do you suppose they'd do that, Bill? My job these days was more about answering questions like this one than asking them. Well, two thoughts, I said. Either they know we've broken their code, could be, said FDR, hope not, or, in an abundance of caution, they don't want diplomats at their own embassy to know they're terminating negotiations with us. Harry and FDR exchanged a look. They liked my answer. Tokyo gave Ambassador Nomura instructions to deliver all 14 pages to state in exactly 20 minutes. Here's the thing, said FDR. 3 Japanese convoys escorting multiple carrier groups left their waters 3 days ago, heading south, destination unknown, on an attack we think they've been planning for weeks. Where? I asked. Malaysia, Philippines, Burma Road, Dutch East Indies, said Harry, waving his hand at the globe in the room. Take your pick. Or maybe all of the above, said FDR, at once. I took that in, then reread aloud the key line in Prime Minister Tojo's final page. It is the obvious intent of the American government to conspire with Great Britain to obstruct Japan's efforts to establish peace through the creation of a new order in Asia. What's that say to you, Bill? Asked Harry. Well, if they're done talking, it sounds like they want a war. That's correct, said the boss, and they mean to drag us into it. But we could still hit them first, said Harry, his tone bearing traces of an unfinished argument. No, we simply cannot do that, Harry, said the boss. Well, not in 20 minutes we can't. He said, we're a democracy and a peaceful people. We don't attack anyone preemptively, said the boss. Annoyed, he was through discussing it and turned back to me. This morning I had General Marshall put every American commander in the Pacific on high alert. There was a knock at the door. The President's secretary, Grace Tully. Navy Secretary needs to speak with you. Harry sat bolt upright. We looked at each other. An electric crackle sparked the room. We both felt it, and it pulled me to my feet. I glanced at the clock to mark the time. It was 1:47. Put him through, said FDR. The phone rang, the boss picked up. Admiral. He listened. No, he said softly, then listened a while. Get back to me the minute you know more. And he hung up. They bombed Pearl Harbor. Then the phones never stopped ringing. I'll read one more page. FDR called Secretary of State Cordell Hull and asked him to receive Ambassador Nomura in his office as scheduled. He'll arrive with a smile and a bow in their perfect formality, he told Hull. Accept their message without reading it or tipping your hand. We know the treachery's underway, and bow them the hell out. We soon learned that by the time General Marshall's warning cable reached Hickam Field in Hawaii, the Japanese had already struck the first blow. Dispatches pouring our way from Pearl grew steadily worse. A second wave of fighters and torpedo bombers targeting comms and airfields, hitting most of our planes before they could unblock their wheels. Battleships trapped in their berths, sitting ducks. Harry couldn't believe it. Not only that we'd been caught unawares, but as always, he was looking beyond the moment. How can a country that prides itself on being smarter and cleverer than every other on the planet do something this suicidally self-destructive? And don't be naive, Harry. The boss shot him a hard look. It's exactly the sort of thing they've done, and they did do in 1904. They sneak attack on the Russian fleet at Port Arthur. It set off 2 years of war. Maintaining steely calm, FDR had called an emergency meet with the Joint Chiefs as soon as the news hit. As the men gathered, the president dictated 2 statements to Steve Early and me for the national reporters now swarming the press room. Harry picked up a call on a secure line overseas. He covered the speaker and said, it's Gil Wynant. He's at Chequers for the weekend. Chequers is the Prime Minister's country house. The boss put Gil on speaker and our British ambassador came in the line. A poised and elegant Ivy Leaguer, Wynant sounded shaky and agitated. We'd just sat down for dinner when the valet brought in a radio and we heard the first BBC reports. Here, sir, he wants to speak to you. He handed off the phone and a startlingly familiar voice broke the scratchy silence. Mr. President, I'm not going to do a Winston Churchill. Mr. President, what's all this about Japan? Is it true? It's entirely true, Winston. We're all in the same boat now. Well, they've hit us all along the Malay Peninsula. We shall declare war immediately. Yep. Bear with me, old boy, one step at a time. I'll go to Congress tomorrow. First, if you please, to ask for a declaration of war against Japan. There was a slight, significant pause. Following your lead, I'll ask the same from Parliament within the hour of yours, said Churchill. Will you declare against Germany as well? This was the outcome Churchill had been pushing us toward for 2 years. I glanced at Harry, who suddenly shook his head. Just to Japan for now, Winston. The little corporal's got his hands full in Moscow. If he's smart, he won't stick his nose into this fight, not just yet. Another hesitation before Churchill responded. That remains to be seen. But I'd say this certainly clarifies things. May God be with you, Mr. President. See, we knew who Churchill was, right? I didn't need to do in the hour of all greatest need. I didn't have to go there. or do a bad FDR, which we've certainly heard many of over the years too. So we're going to talk about the book rather than me just blurt out a bunch of stuff. I brought my dear friend of 40 years, and if you're Twin Peaks fans, you undoubtedly know of Harley's great contributions to the show, and we've remained friends ever since. And even sometimes we mistakenly are given the wrong hotel room when we check into the hotel together.
I got his fancy room.
So anyway, let's start.
I'll start.
Okay.
So, first of all, you have to get an act of Congress before we go to war. It's interesting. That people actually
It was a
consider.
quaint old tradition.
It is a quaint old tradition. I remember when you study the book, and it's about FDR, and I'm historically illiterate because I didn't really study much in high school or college really, and so I know a little bit about FDR, but not much, right? And what I loved about the book was reading about people, extraordinarily flawed individuals, men and women, who spent their lives, dedicated their lives to fixing what was broken, right? That's how it came to me. And particularly that we live in a time where people seem more likely just to want to break shit up for no apparent reason. I found the book really inspiring. So that's my thumbnail review that I'll be publishing it later. But that was, and so I'm just curious, when you came to write the book, was that in front of mind, back of mind, just about, because it is such a different time, and you're writing fiction, but you're also writing about fact, right?
Indeed. Well, there's a story here, and it has to do with the fact I've been carrying this story around with me my whole life. The man whose voice is narrating this book was a fellow named William Hassett, who was started with FDR as his correspondence secretary in 1934. By this point, he was his everyday secretary for all things. He was also my great-granduncle. And I knew him as a kid. He lived until 1965, and he was enormously close to my dad, who he was very fond of. My dad's in the book. He was in the Navy during this time. He and Franklin had met during World War I, when Franklin, in his first post of any significance in his political career, was named the Undersecretary of the Navy, which was far more important than it sounds. He was literally running the war from the Navy Department, and he had learned everything there was to know about it. He was a young congressman from New York. He was from a famous family. He had a very famous fifth cousin who had preceded him, who we all know, who's on Mount Rushmore, Uncle Teddy, who was Eleanor's actual uncle. So he didn't end up in that job by accident, and he wanted to take advantage of it. And Will, at that time, was a reporter for the Washington Post, and he was covering the Navy Department. And they became fast friends. He became the one journalist that FDR felt comfortable sharing things with, and he was the guy he knew he could go to for a quote. It was a symbiotic relationship, but it turned into a friendship. And it persisted all the way through the end of the war. Will went with him to cover the Versailles Peace Treaty at the end of the war, which brought everything to a conclusion. And then he stayed overseas as a foreign correspondent for the Post and also for the Associated Press. He covered the Irish Revolution. He was literally a war correspondent in those battles as Ireland was getting its freedom from England. And then he was assigned to the Weimar Republic in Berlin, where he happened to note the rise of a certain young mustached politician. He saw Hitler speak in a Munich beer hall in 1924. So when he came back to the States in 1925, he had a pretty good idea of where we were headed geopolitically. Instead of going back into the press, though, it was the go-go 20s, and he decided, oh yeah, I think I'll do what all my friends are doing. I'm going to start a public relations company. And 4 years later, when the crash hit, he lost everything, as did so many others. And he ended up, when Franklin finally took office in early 33, with the Works Project Administration, which was one of his ways of getting people back to work. until he got a call one day in early '34 from his friend who was the actual press secretary at the White House saying, the old man wants to meet with you. And at that occasion, he offered them the job that he took, and he was there for every single day of that administration until the day he died in 1945, and he was with them when he did in Warm Springs, Georgia. He was the guy who announced his death to the world, and he had arranged his funeral. And as you may not know, he rode home to Hyde Park, New York, where he was born and raised in a funeral train. And people lined the tracks all the way from Georgia to upstate New York over a 2.5-day ride. He went down the next day to clear his office out of the White House, thinking that's the end of that. And he got a call from now President Harry Truman, a name that might be familiar to somebody Twin Peaks fan. No relation, but he'd only been in the job for 90 days. He'd only met Franklin Roosevelt a couple of times. But what he told Will was, one of the questions I had for the boss was, should I ever be unfortunate enough to be in this job, who should I bring along who's worked with you? And the only person whose name he mentioned was Will Hassett. So he ended up working for Truman for 8 years and finally left the White House in 1953. The other thing he did as an old reporter was, when that happened at Pearl Harbor, he started keeping a diary of the war. And it was because there was a press blackout on every movement, or there was nothing about Franklin in the news anymore. So he said, as an old reporter, I feel an obligation to history to keep track of this. And he kept that diary every day for the next 4 years. And he published that diary in 1958, after he retired. To great acclaim, it became a kind of standard text for historians, because it was, I believe, the greatest window into who Franklin Roosevelt actually was as a human being, underneath the grand facade of the great man that we mostly remember now. And I knew him as a kindly old fella who we would see once a year when we were up in Vermont visiting family in the summers. And on my 11th birthday, or for my 11th birthday, he gave me a copy of that book. And I carried it with me every day for the rest of my life. I didn't read it for about 10 years. I didn't know anything at 11. I knew I was writing my first novel and I wanted to be a writer, but I woke up, I'm sorry, am I jumping on your question, because you might be asking this next.
You're answering them all.
Okay, good. He already told me what he was going to ask. I wanted to save him the trouble. I was in New York on Election Day in 2016, book tour for the Secret History of Twin Peaks. It was the end of the tour. And my hotel was on 56th Street, right across the street from the Hilton, where a certain real estate guy was having his victory party that night. And as I watched in dismay, as most people did, those returns come in and finally declared at 2:30 in the morning, I could hear the cheers from across the street before I saw the results on television. And I woke up the next day utterly devastated, as many of us were, because I had met this man twice before. So I called the FDR library out of the blue, and I asked to speak to the librarian. Fortunately, she knew who I was, and they certainly knew who my uncle was, as she pointed out to me. Well, he was the original director of this library and one of the original trustees. We'd love to have you come up and take a look around. So I did the next day. I drove up there. And if you've never been to Hyde Park, I strongly suggest that you do. It's, I think, one of the great pieces of hallowed ground in this country's history. And the libraries, which was the first presidential library, is beyond compare. And they had a trolley full of material, about the two of them together, that would have taken me 5 months to read if I'd been there. So I made repeated visits, and that's how I, to her, and I left that day and said, that's the next book I'm going to write.
tell us, it's funny because the book has so many interesting characters, and also just the sense of geography of that place.
Yeah.
Like, isn't there the house that's nearby that was a sucky house that no one wanted to live in?
Well, that was the Vanderbilt man.
The Vanderbilt man. But you really do get a sense of that in such a lovely way. But the one I personally love to talk about, because he's my favorite character in the book, is Harry Hopkins.
Yeah.
I just think that Harry Hopkins is deserving of his own movie, his own TV series, his own, and I knew the name,
Yeah.
but I knew nothing about him. And I don't think people generally do.
They don't.
And he's such a hero and also a romantic figure
Yeah.
in a way that is tragic
Yeah.
and also hopeful at the same time. But anyway, go ahead, Harry
Well,
Hopkins.
he was to FDR's sort of Mercutio was to Romeo. He was a labor activist from Iowa. He was the son of a saddle maker who, been the first in his family to go to college. He met Eleanor Roosevelt when Franklin served one term as the governor of New York, and helped institute all these great programs for New Yorkers and putting people back to work after the crash. And he was a kindred spirit to Franklin, who became his, I think, Lancelot's a better comp. He was the guy who was willing to go out and fight the battles for working people. He was responsible for the Works Project administration. He was instrumental in pushing the agendas for the start, and people may not remember this, the start of Social Security. That was Franklin's bill. The start of the 40-hour work week, the end of child labor, eventually the GI Bill. These were all things that came out of that office. And Harry was his champion. He was the guy who, I mean, you would call him a hatchet man if he was in Hollywood. He was the guy who would go fight with Congress for the things that Franklin wanted, so he didn't have to get his hands dirty and could keep the alliances he needed. He was also dying of what was an undiagnosed case of celiac disease. They didn't even know what that was at that point. They thought it was stomach cancer. He was wasting away, and he thought, FDR, that Harry was going to be his successor in the White House. But he was so sick and had 2 operations by the time Franklin's first 2 terms were up that he couldn't do it. He periodically had to miss work for months at a time to rehabilitate or go through another surgery, but he kept coming back. He lived to see the end of the war, which Franklin did not quite see, but he died the next year at 56, and he gave his life for the war and for this country. And for that, I agree with you. He's somebody who should be considered one of our true American heroes.
And didn't he also fall in love at the drop of a hat, which I admire?
Well, he was like a guy in a madcap 30s screwball comedy. He dated, he was a kind of a scrawny kid from a farm in Iowa, and he dated Carol Lombard and Paulette Goddard, and was married to Charlie Chaplin soon afterwards. He finally ended up marrying a woman who was the editor of Harper's Bazaar in Paris for 10 years. He was a truly remarkable figure. So that was a wonderful person that I was able to try to bring back to life as well, because it's an instrumental part of the story, and you can't really know the story of FDR and his time in the White House without knowing who Harry Hopkins was. So we hope he'll be in the conversation a little bit more.
Yeah, you'll get many things from the book, but the Hopkins for me is one of the biggest takeaways that I really loved. And also, not that FDR's life was without romance. And you do touch on that in the book, right?
Yeah.
I mean, again, these are all the things that I sort of knew but didn't know. It helps to be historically illiterate when you're reading a novel that is about history.
Yeah.
But what about that story, right? Because there's Eleanor, who's sort of, I wouldn't say she's exactly on the periphery in the book, but she's not part of the inner circle in that same way, right?
Well,
she's like this extraordinary figure.
An extraordinary figure, and an extraordinary force in her own right. She had staked out that place for herself. I mean, remember, she grew up with Uncle Teddy, who effectively helped raise her because her father died tragically when she was 6 years old. She knew what politics was like. She had really wanted no part of it. She was kind of shy and extremely intelligent, but she was married to a rising politician. There's a an unfortunate thing that happened in their marriage in 1918 when they had had 5 kids in like 5 years of marriage, 6 years of marriage. And Eleanor said, okay, that's enough. And that's how many kids Teddy had. We've done our job. So she basically closed the bedroom door and slept down the hall. And then she took the kids and went away for the summers. And she had hired as her appointment secretary and nanny a lovely young woman from Virginia, from a once wealthy family that had kind of fallen on hard times, named Lucy Mercer. This is now public knowledge. I'm not telling you anything you didn't know. They had an affair, she and Franklin. They fell in love. And it nearly ended the marriage. In fact, it was only the steely will of Franklin's mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, that kept them together, because she explained to him, if you do this, if you go marry this woman, you'll have no future whatsoever in this business, in politics, in this country. And by the way, you're not going to have any of my money either. And so I would say charitably at that point, Eleanor and Franklin decided, okay, we've got a partnership, and we're each going to have our own world and our own private life and our own responsibility. The only thing I want from you is you must never see Lucy Mercer again. So that was how it happened. I don't think it's any accident that a year and a half later, Franklin came down with polio. He had already had the legs cut out from under him in some ways. And after he spent 6 years looking for a cure that didn't exist, and sort of finding a feeling of hope in this place called Warm Springs, Georgia, at a rundown resort where they treated people with polio in these warm, natural mineral baths. Not until then, when he was taking the waters with these poor farmers and shopkeepers who'd gone broke and kids from broken families, that he kind of let the "don't you know who I am" get washed away. And he came out of that experience. I think this is what distinguishes him from just about every other politician we've had, to say, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life to making sure that those people aren't forgotten. And that's what he lived up to. He never made a point of saying it, but he lived up to that standard, and everything he did was in service of that cause. And that's another reason why I think he deserves our interest and respect and keeping him in our memory, for a lot of reasons, including the world we're now living in. It doesn't have to be this way, and it wasn't at one point. So, did I answer your question?
You did. I've already forgotten the question. So you had this book in your head then for a long time.
Yeah, in various forms. And my original thought was I was going to write it as a play. I was trained as a playwright, and I worked for 4 years actually writing the play and did staged readings in New York with really good actors and a wonderful director friend of mine, and really honed the dialogue. What I realized was missing was my uncle's voice.
Yeah.
I had to really tell the story through him. He was the one who wrote the diary. He was the one who had kind of mystically given me this charge, do something with this someday, kid. I think that's what he meant by it. Maybe he was just giving me a book, I don't know. At that point I switched horses. I said, this isn't a play, it's gotta be a book. And it's gotta be in his voice. And I started basically channeling him from that point forward. And so it's 9 years from start to finish. It's the longest I've ever worked on anything.
I actually saw some readings of the play, and just to connect everything together, wasn't Dana Ashbrook?
Yes, Dana
who did he play?
He played Dr. Howard Broom,
Yes.
his cardiologist.
Right. And then Kyle, somebody?
And Kyle, somebody, what was his last name?
Yes.
That's it, it's a Scottish name. He played Franklin for me in one of the, he was wonderful. He'd actually played Franklin in a miniseries for Dutch TV. It turned out that was broadcast on PBS. So it was a great fun Oh, David Patrick Kelly originally
That's
played
right.
Harry Hopkins in
Yeah,
one reading.
that's the one I was thinking of, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Twin Peaks is a family, you know, it just, because we don't have dinner every week doesn't mean we don't think about each other all the time. And so that's how it came to be a book. That's why we're all here. Thanks for coming.
It's, when you're writing, because I have no idea how to do it. When you're writing about real people, do you ever run up against, okay, what am I fictionalizing? What am I changing? What do I owe to the truth that I know or the truth that I imagine? And then, of course, you've got this family history and the diary and all that stuff. What was the biggest challenge in doing that?
Well, I'd had some experience with this. If anybody remembers the first book I wrote, The List of Seven,
Right.
It's about Arthur Conan Doyle, who was arguably a real person. And then again with The Greatest Game Ever Played, which was about real people and real events. But it was about golf. It wasn't quite as momentous as the presidency during the Depression and World War II. So I approached this with trying to be much more careful about where I was making leaps. That the historian's art is ethically very strict, and they have professional standards. And I'll be the first to raise their hand and say, I'm no historian. You know, I didn't study it. I don't have those instincts. My instincts are as a storyteller and a dramatist. So there is dialogue here, but a lot of it is sourced. A lot of it's in the diary. A lot of it is, I had to read biographies on every other person in this story. Some of it came from private papers that other members of my family gave to me of Will's time in other places. I now have the field glasses that he looked at the Irish Civil War through when he was covering that. And all of which is enormously meaningful to me on a personal level. But so the reason it's called, I wrote Greatest Game Ever Played 26 years ago, and it was before we really had historical fiction as a category of book. It was just, and I caught some flack for it from golf historians who said, well, he didn't use a 5-iron on that shot. You know? I know, but I had no way of knowing that. I wasn't there. So I decided this time to just make a point of saying, okay, it's a historical novel. And then I said, but let me add one more thing. I'm going to call it an FDR novel. Because lots of books are published about Franklin every year, and Roosevelt's. There's a whole cottage industry about it. But I'm no less a historian than Doris Kearns Goodman, who I had the fortune to meet at a Red Sox game some years ago, told me that, look, if it wasn't for your uncle's books, we wouldn't have a clue about who FDR was as a person. That's how insightful he was about him, and how. So that was actually the last conversation I had that made me go, geez, maybe I better write this someday. So that's how it came to be a novel of historical fiction, but it's pretty well sourced, and also not dried as, you know, a 3-day-old steak. So that's the storyteller's prerogative.
Well, in the 8-hour television series, of which I will write episode 3, who would you see Will? Who would play Will? Is what I want to know.
Well,
do you do that when you write? Because you can see the historical characters, obviously, and I don't know what Will looks like in real life.
Well, funnily enough, if you remember, does anybody remember the movie HUD? Do you remember the actor Melvin Douglas, who played HUD's father?
Yeah.
He was also, if you remember the movie Being There, he was the dying billionaire who befriends Chauncey Gardner.
Yeah.
I have a couple of tapes of interviews that my uncle gave in the years before his death. He sounded exactly like Melvin Douglas.
Wow.
I mean, exactly. I could close my eyes and see Melvin Douglas. So that's who unfortunately, he died 35 years ago, so he's not available.
Well,
yeah.
thanks to AI, nothing's impossible.
That's true. It's not
How about let's cast more? Harry Hopkins?
Harry Hopkins.
Does that stuff ever come to mind?
You know, it's funny because I actually see the real people when
Yeah,
I
I
think
know,
about
see, I
it.
know, but it's,
I mean, I see Franklin.
Young Jack Nicholson.
Harry, for Harry?
I don't know who Harry would be, I have no idea.
I know, I mean, I don't want
He's
to waste
my
your
favorite character in
time.
the book.
I mean,
I'm
there's-
sure they have many ideas for these characters.
Well, let them read the book first.
Well,
and
that's-
then we can have an opening kind of competition.
Exactly, that would be fun.
See who, I mean, it occurred to me that I think our nearly late greatest living actor is Ray Fiennes.
Yeah,
He'd make a pretty good FDR.
boy, would he, yeah.
And for Will, you know, I mean, I go back to that era. I think of
Yeah.
Frederick March. I
Yeah, of
think
course.
of people who were good, Spencer Tracy, people who were plain, not fancy or flashy people, but they were present. I mean, he called Uncle Will the bishop for a reason. And he eventually kind of made his confession to him about something that's at the heart of the book. That was their relationship. Yeah. I mean, I know who played Hitler. He's not in the book. I mean, he doesn't make a personal
And
appearance.
Stephen Miller's bald, so I don't really.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
He
can
could
sell
play.
that.
He could play Harry Himmler, maybe. Not Harry Hopkins, but
Might work.
I mean,
It's interesting because, do you read a lot of historical fiction? Because I don't. And I think that people probably, this is so entertaining, right? And so it's not, which is not to say that it panders in that way.
yeah.
But I mean, do you read a lot of, I'm just
I
curious.
don't actually. I read a lot of history.
Right, well, that's the key, I suppose, yeah.
And always have. I love military history, Hollywood history, you know, the places where I've spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
And biographies. I'm a huge fan of biographies. So, but no, I don't actually read much historical fiction.
Yeah, me neither, but I read this one.
Yeah.
Very good. I mean, when you finish a book like that, is it, do you then just walk away from it? Is it inside you for a while? Is it, because this has been such a long process.
Yeah.
Right? And I would think that setting aside is probably hard.
It was hard for me, but I felt, I mean, it sounds weird and mystical, but I've had this experience with 2 other books where characters that I was writing about who were long gone started showing up in my dreams and talking to me.
No.
If that sounds weird and you want to leave the room suddenly, I wouldn't blame you. And I had the same experience here. I felt like he was guiding me in a weird way.
That's awesome.
But you know, you might be able to tell from my other work, I have some strange beliefs.
There is that.
I do believe in that kind of sort of spiritual reality that's beyond our understanding. I certainly hope it's true. Because, I worked for a while on a book about the great philosopher J. Krishnamurti, who you may have heard of, who was very famous, not now, but he lived for 60 years in Ojai, California, where I live. And he was great friends with Joseph Campbell, the great delineator of mythology, and they were tremendously good friends. And they had a great, I remember they had this is a book. They once had a dinner, a lunch in Ojai. It was Joseph Campbell, J. Krishnamurti, Charlie Chaplin, and Igor Stravinsky for lunch.
Or it's a play.
Or a play. And Greta Garbo couldn't make it, but she was invited. He told Campbell, you know, I've heard that it is true that people do die, and there's a chance that I myself might die. And this was a guy who had been thought of as the Messiah when he was younger, which I thought it was quite droll for him to put it that way.
That's awesome.
We are all going to die, and we might as well get used to it. And if you can make your peace with it and think, okay, well, if I'm talking or hearing from people who are gone, maybe there's something to this. So if that's any comfort to you, I'm happy to offer that as a strange anecdote.
You're all gonna die.
Hardly ever the realist.
Just so
I'm
you
not buying
know.
a damn book.
Yeah, yeah.
When you finish a book, do you think about the next one? Or do you, or does
I'll
does it
stop.
come slowly?
I'll
or-
stop, I'll have a Diet Coke, and then I'll think about that.
That's fair. Harry Truman, named after the, did you name him? You must have.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But Truman, I mean, he was close friends with both of them. Truman, he loved Truman. He loved working for him, and they went on fishing trips together when they were both retired with like General Eisenhower, you know, or President Eisenhower. Can you imagine that group, you know, on a fishing trip in the Bahamas? I had pictures.
That's awesome.
He felt Truman was an incredibly warm and engaging and accessible person, whereas he, you know, Franklin was kind of cold and unreachable, and that's why they called him the Yankee Sphinx.
Yeah.
But he admired him tremendously. So two very different people doing the same tough job. But we were lucky to have him when we did. And it makes you think twice about how you vote.
Yeah, that's, I mean, to me, again, the thing about the book is that it's such a nice vacation from the impossibility of our current circumstance, right? It's because everything now to me just seems fucking nuts, right? And it seems like there's still codes and honor and again, as I said before, all the flawed people, I mean, all those
Yeah.
characteristics, and yet the way that they rose to meet certain occasions.
Yeah, Franklin was a man of great faith. He was Episcopalian. He never talked about it or felt the need to talk about it. But he didn't worry about dying. He really didn't. And he also, as his daughter eloquently put it, and it's true of Harry Hopkins as well, those two gave their lives to this war as surely as any kid who died at Omaha Beach or crossing the Rhine or at the Battle of the Bulge. That was what they did. And that was the kind of leadership this country needs and deserves. So, get involved in local politics. Don't miss a chance to cast a vote. I've done that ever since I turned voting age. The results have not always been what I want, but you know.
My first vote was for George McGovern.
Mine was too.
Yeah, and I lived in Massachusetts at the time.
Oh, cool.
The one state that he won on that night. And I walked away going, we got this in the bag.
Yeah.
Everyone around me is voting for this McGovern character. It's like,
Yeah, it was a no-brainer.
It didn't work out that way. Do you want to do questions?
Sure.
Please feel
Yeah.
free to.
Yes, ma'am.
How did you come up with the title?
Well, this was what Harry Hopkins used to call the boss. Sort of disparagingly, he'd say, that goddamn Yankee Sphinx, he just won't answer my questions. And so Will was equally frustrated sometimes by his inability, but it became a challenge to him. He was a trained reporter. He said, surely I can figure out what makes this guy tick. So it's important in a lot of ways, as what the group, it was an affectionate nickname. It wasn't meant disparagingly. But that was the one that stuck for me. I had lots of other ideas, but I thought that really sums up who he was. I mean, when you visit, if you ever do, and I suggest you do, Hyde Park, the house where he was born is there. He grew up on this square mile of real estate that they owned. It's where they're all buried. It's where the presidential library was built next door. And it's, if you want a refresher course in what the best of what we have to offer, that's the place to go find it. I'm gonna be there a week from tomorrow doing an event like this.
You're doing it at Hyde Park.
At Hyde Park.
Wow, that's so great.
Presidential library.
That's
So,
awesome.
I'm really thrilled.
I'm assuming I'll be flown out for the.
You will.
Do you mind a Twin Peaks question?
Not at all.
No.
Okay, we were wondering if the dwarf in Twin Peaks was modeled after Ray Palmer, who was also very short,
Ray Palmer?
the founder of science fiction?
No.
Okay, okay.
No, I've never heard of Ray Palmer.
Okay.
I've heard of Leland Palmer. No, it was that was just how we wrote it.
Okay. It was just a coincidence that Ray Palmer, who founded Fate magazine, was a dwarf.
Oh,
Wow.
cool.
Awesome.
Any other questions? Now, way in the back. Yes, sir.
There's a fantastic scene in Twin Peaks where Dale is pontificating into his tape recorder and says something to the effect of, what really went on between the Kennedys and Marilyn Monroe, and
Yeah.
who really pulled the trigger on JFK. And to me, that always sounded profoundly Lynchian. And now I'm starting to wonder if that was one of you two guys.
There was-
It's absolutely fair for you to wonder that. I'm gonna say,
I wrote a movie about Marilyn Monroe that never got made, based on a book about her called Goddess, which does sort of get to the truth of what went on with the Kennedys. And Kennedy was shot on November 22nd, 1963, and he was buried on my 10th birthday. So I remember every moment of that week like it was etched in my brain. And I was then 11 or 12, I got a copy of the Warren Commission report in paperback.
oh,
And I combed through it looking for flaws. And I've been following that case. I'll let you know if I get to the bottom of
we
it.
cracked it.
I'm
Those are
hoping.
the two. It was the Warren Commission and Paul is Dead.
Yeah.
I did a deep dive.
Oh, I did too. I was playing that album back.
Way into Paul.
I was calling, on the cover of Sgt. Pepper, if you turn the album upside down, it's a phone number. And we called that number. And nobody answered.
Tragical.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
A little bit of a two-part thing. I was curious, when you're approaching any of your historical fiction works, when it comes to the creative decisions, how are you balancing the things like the narrator's voice, which is it maybe events you're going to change, dialogue you're just going to create or tweak, and kind of just a little bit more insight into where you feel like you strike that balance? And then do you also feel like, kind of based on what Harley said, do you feel like being at least somewhat historically illiterate about the period of history that a work of historical fiction is based on helps you immerse yourself into that story more than if you are a historian who studied that thing a lot?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm an amateur historian. So the root of amateurism more, it's because we love something. And when I did the same with List of Son-in-Laws, so Greatest Game Ever Played, I read dozens and dozens of books, and I created what I call a kind of memory palace in my head. I try to recreate the world of that moment so that every sense memory is available to me. I went and toured his home. I got a private tour of Franklin's home, Springwood, and I'm not kidding you, I felt people alive in that space. I was me and a tour guide after hours, and it was spooky, but in a good way. So it's a combination of intuition and then creating what is hopefully a really accurate memory palace view of that period.
This kind of relates to both Twin Peaks and the Yankee Sphinx. This being partially inspired by a diary and your two Twin Peaks novels, both being taking form of found documents,
Yes.
and even the tie-ins written by your brother Scott and Jen Lynch also being epistolary. Can you talk a little bit about your...
Well, I hadn't actually thought of that until you brought it up. But
By the way, I'm asking that question in Portland. Just saying.
we're taking this on the road.
Yeah.
I mean, your point's very well taken, and it was a good way I think it's a good way to tell a story. I've always liked epistolary novels, and it's one of the oldest, actually, novelistic forms we have. So the earliest novels were allegedly found that way. So yeah, particularly when you're dealing with things you're trying to establish as fact, that it seems to give you an extra layer of authenticity. So I think I have to think a little bit more about it, but I think that's a good question.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Speak now.
Or forever hold your peace? Yes.
Going back to list of 7, I know for a while there was a script or there was possibility of it being made into a movie. Is that completely
Yes, there was a
dead?
very strong possibility for about 30 years. There's a phrase we have in show business, Harley knows it, it's called "that's show business." This happens all the time. We were inches away from getting that movie made, like 4 different times, with 2 different really good directors, and each time something weird happened. So it hasn't happened yet. I wish it would. I mean, I have people who now tell me, "Oh, but don't you realize that was one of the first steampunk novels?" And I go, "No, I didn't know that. I didn't know what that was, and at the time, I certainly wasn't thinking that. I was just thinking, oh, this is a cool story, I'd like to tell it this way." So if you haven't read it and you want a rollicking good time in Victorian England, it's not a bad place to spend some time.
And the sequel.
Yeah, no, I mean, the story is we were an inch away from making the movie. It was gonna be Guillermo del Toro's first English language film. And Jim Cameron, who was gonna produce it, was scheduled to have breakfast with the guy that we had hoped was gonna say yes to play the lead, to play Arthur Conan Doyle. And Jim went to breakfast at the Four Seasons the next morning to wait for him, and he never showed up. And 4 hours later, we heard that Hugh Grant had been arrested for solicitation on Sunset Boulevard the night before. And it suddenly left town. That's a true, that's show business. What are you gonna do?
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. Yes, in the back.
I love all just the UFO or everything in Twin Peaks. I was wondering if you had a favorite, like, UFO encounter or some paranormal experience that
Well,
you've always thought a lot of.
I've been interested in it all my life. And when I was living in Minnesota in the 1970s, there was a rash of UFO sightings, and I was working at the time for a PBS station doing documentaries. So I took a video crew out to this small town where these had been reported, and it was in the newspaper, and it was very odd. And I happened to have breakfast at a local cafe and bumped into a guy from MUFON, which is the citizen brigade of people who volunteer and investigate UFO incidents. And he said, "Well, I'm gonna meet all the witnesses, why don't you come with me?" And I said, "Really? Yeah, okay." And me and my cameraman rode along with him, and we sat in and filmed. One guy didn't want to film. These 4 eyewitnesses of really strange accounts of, I was in my pickup truck and suddenly I was being followed by 4 orange balls that were of light chasing me down the highway. And if you look up at the top of my road here, you'll see they sheared off the tops of all the trees. And sure enough, these were 35-foot tall pines, and the tops had all been sheared off all the way along the road. Sat in this suburban couple's living room overlooking a lake, beautiful picture window. And they said, yeah, that night we looked out and we saw all these lights, and then a huge cylindrical object the size of a football field floated into view. And all the lights went into the cylinder. It was dark outside, but it was lit up like it was the county fair. I heard those kind of reports, a couple more like that. So yeah, that's where that started. It's not finished yet, but I actually, with Harley, we had a dinner with Steven Spielberg because he was a fan of the show, and we showed him. They had when it aired the last episode of season 1, and then we got into an intense half-hour discussion about Close Encounters. And he's finally made the movie that he always wanted to make, which is coming out next month.
Yes, well, yeah.
Is it full disclosure? Is that,
Yeah.
Not that he needs us to promote the movie.
We're just trying to do what we can.
I mean, the poor guy needs to catch a break.
That's the sliding doors moment too.
Yeah.
He was gonna direct the first episode.
He was going to direct the first episode of the second
He
season.
said, just make it as weird as possible. So, okay?
Yeah.
Done.
So we ended up having David direct it instead. That was actually, yeah, it was the 2-hour episode of season 2.
Yeah.
Because, and then Stephen made a little thing called Schindler's List.
And then away he went.
Away he went. His career really took off. Got show business. Well, thank you all for coming. Let's buy some books. We'll meet you at the table.